Alderman Smith, Councillor Quintas, Minister Regan Ellen, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I've called this briefing and welcome you today in my capacity as chairperson of the Minibus Taxi Task Team, which was created in February this year to address key issues faced by the minibus taxi industry. As a government, we are united in our serious concern about the current situation and the priority of our commuters. We are here to share an update of these matters, including what happened this morning, and call for calm for all stakeholders to keep our roads safe and our transport moving. I was extremely disappointed last week when the industry leadership chose to suspend its participation in the minibus task team ahead of the first meeting that was scheduled this Monday. That meeting went ahead without our minibus taxi stakeholders. This platform was created in good faith and has enabled robust discussion and sharing of information, putting our heads together to make progress on the key issues and towards formalization of the minibus taxi industry. But we do appreciate that there are complex challenges for taxi operators, which links to the broader transportation crisis in South Africa. On this hope, I hope that Minister Cele's meeting this morning with the industry leaders here in Cape Town, he'll go back to National Cabinet and raise the urgency of the formalization of the minibus taxi industry, which we have raised for a long time. From our side, our mobility department is working alongside our City of Cape Town to resolve the ongoing operational license challenges. The solutions are not simple nor instant, but we are tackling them regardless. Let me be frank, the wheel of government turns frustratingly slowly, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The first big win for our task team was the fast tracking of the long-waiting Bruck and Get licenses, which took 8 years to finalize. We've done it in 4 months. Since the creation of the task team in February 2023, 144 positive decision letters have been handed over by a provincial regulatory entity to the minibus taxi operators, approving their operating license applications. Our officials have been working with the City of Cape Town to address other areas where the availability of operating licenses has not enabled operations to meet the demand for transport. Regarding the impoundment of vehicles in the City of Cape Town Metro, there are a range of reasons for this enforcement action, which my colleagues of the City of Cape Town will speak to. The PRE has worked hard to improve the systems and streamline the processing of applications so that where possible, operating license issues can be resolved and not be a reason for impoundment. My department has also been on the ground to address the issue of B97 as a matter of urgency. A survey has just been completed to ascertain the facts of bus operations on that route. These results will determine any potential action to be taken as the regulator. I sincerely hope that Santaco Western Cape will come back to the table so we can continue with the work of the task team and the strike action will not cause harm or property damage to the people in the Western Cape. It is our commitment to improve mobility in the Western Cape for people to be able to get to work safely. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We are now going to hand over to the City of Cape Town MMC for Urban Mobility, Councillor Quintas. Thank you very much. If you can share your remarks.
Thank you, and very good afternoon to the members of the media that are present, as well as those that are online. It is very important for me to stress, firstly, the city's ethos in terms of urban mobility or transport around the minibus taxi industry being a vital component of the City of Cape Town's public transport offering, and also being a key partner within the City of Cape Town in terms of delivering a varied mix of public transport options for the residents across the metro. And it is in that spirit that the city willingly agreed to join the minibus taxi task team. I think it's also important, though, to mention that the city does have its own industry transition department within the Directorate of Urban Mobility that engages on a regular basis with all associations and the larger mother bodies. We formalized this process as an IGR, or an Intergovernmental Relations task team under the Minister for Mobility in the province. And we made certain commitments at the very beginning of that process. Those included the city fast-tracking and finalizing the operating license plan demand study, which would then be able to inform the minister and the provincial regulatory entity in regards to how many operating licenses would be able to be issued. This was done, the commitment was kept, and the operating licenses then went to the demand survey went to the provincial regulatory entity, who then began the process of taking those operating licenses to market. The city even went as far as to assist setting up a help desk where we would be able to funnel and send applications as well, formatted, made easier for those applicants to the provincial regulatory entity to try and fast track it and make it more inclusive and easier for would-be operators to apply for those operating licenses. We have also, through the period of the minibus taxi task team engagements, we have committed and in some instances already begun the review on certain routes within the city of Cape Town to try and understand if there is in fact increased demand and therefore more demand for operating licenses. That is an ongoing process that requires analytical study, and it's not an inverted commas thumbsuck. It has to be backed up by clinical research in order to fulfill our role as the Land Transport Authority and the regulatory authority in terms of route permits, as well as route plans, and most importantly, to inform the provincial regulatory entity of that analytical study in terms of demand, which then informs them on the issuing of operating licenses. I think it's very important to say that the city wants to have that partnership relationship with the minibus taxi industry, but a partnership is a two-way street. It requires both elements providing what is required in order for that partnership to be strong and for it to be long-lasting. The city has certainly provided many of our commitments have been met, and we have provided portals and assistance to try and make things easier in terms of the Urban Mobility Directorate. However, the other side of the partnership requires that the minibus industry also look into their own internal housekeeping to ensure that their vehicles are roadworthy, to ensure that their drivers do not have outstanding warrants of arrest, to make sure that the drivers have driver's licenses, and to make sure that the drivers are coached and with whatever other programs are necessary to encourage better driving behavior. Because all that our primary interest is in the city of Cape Town is ensuring that there is safe commuter transport, and the safety of commuters is paramount for the Urban Mobility Directorate. And we hope to renew our discussions with the minibus taxi industry as soon as possible. And we also call for calm. The right to strike and protest is enshrined in our constitution and will be defended. However, that right does not supersede the rights of others to freedom of movement, for their option to use other modes of transport, and it also the rights of protection of public and private property. So in that interest, in that spirit, we are asking that the strike period remain peaceful, and that the city not be brought to unnecessary standstill or infringements of the rights of others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Quintus. And I will now hand over to the City of Cape Town Maker Member for Safety and Security, Alderman Smith. Thank you.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. MEC, MMC, MEC Ellen, and all members of the media present. So I think the key departing point for us is equality before the law, in that all road users, all transport operators must be treated equally before the law. So that's a key principle for us, and that is matched by the pursuit of road safety. Whereas the goal of the transport departments in the province and the city is to look at the broader functioning and supply and demand of public transport. From an enforcement perspective, our goal is to ensure that we reduce the road mortality figures and achieve increased driver compliance in terms of the National Road Traffic Act and the National Land Transportation Act. And that is essentially for the purpose of reducing the death toll. Last year, South Africa lost around 12,500 people on our roads who were killed in motor vehicle accidents or road-related incidents. And those figures by international standards are completely unacceptable. So we have an important focus on improving that safety, improving the safety of the commuters in these public transport vehicles and all other public transport, all other transport and road users, because quite frankly, no commuter should be having or expected to settle for less. No commuter should be expected to settle for unsafe transport. And the lives of every commuter is important to us. So it cannot be that an industry says to us, well, we're busy with transporting a very large number of people, but inadvertently we believe we need to create a number of offences, and we expect you not to react to those offences because we're busy with critical transport work. We accept the importance of the transport work, but we also expect the industry to improve its standards, to deploy roadworthy vehicles with competent drivers who are fit and proper drivers, who understand the National Road Traffic Act and the provisions of law, and operate those vehicles in a safe manner that doesn't put their passengers, their commuters, or other road users at risk. So that's an important principle for us. It is MEC probably important within the context of this debate to clarify the issue around the bylaw. Important to note that not a single public transport vehicle has been impounded in terms of the traffic bylaw. All vehicles that are public transport vehicles are impounded in terms of national legislation. So this is legislation drafted or approved by national government in the form of the National Land Transportation Act, that says that in order to operate a public transport vehicle, you have to have an operating license, and you have to operate in terms of the conditions of that operating license. And one of the conditions of that license is that you comply with all other road traffic legislation. And so driving on a sidewalk, driving over a stop street, ignoring a traffic signal, driving into oncoming traffic, all those kind of offences, reckless driving, speeding, those are moving violations which we meet with impoundments as an attempt to achieve meaningful behaviour change. The traffic bylaw was drafted and approved firstly by the Safety and Security Portfolio Committee, then by the Mayoral Committee, and then by full council. And that extends the practices of impoundments to private vehicles. Previously, it was only the National Land Transportation Act, which applies only to public transport vehicles. The city has now extended those impoundment practices also to private vehicles. About 2 years ago, we started reducing the amount of fines issued to public transport vehicles and tried to move towards impoundments because the fines were ineffective. If you are government or any other entity and you do the same thing over and over, year after year, and you do not achieve meaningful results, your road death toll doesn't improve, your complaints don't improve, the driver compliance doesn't improve, it is futile to continue doing the same thing. Then it could reasonably be said that the only thing you're interested in is the traffic fine income, which is not our goal. Our goal is road traffic safety compliance. And so we started moving towards impounding in terms of the National Act in an attempt to create meaningful behaviour change and reduce our road fatalities. The horrible accident in Mitchell's Plain is an example of exactly what we're trying to avoid. And it is not possible to say that you are not shaken by the horror of that incident and not understand at the same time that something more significant needs to happen in terms of how public transport operators operate. Otherwise, we will not achieve behaviour change. We're simply paying lip service to it. MEC and colleagues, that's where this came from, that we are around the city increasingly doing these public transport operations, which includes scholar in transit or scholar transport operations, and the operation outside the station deck is an example of that. During that operation, we impounded 15 vehicles, some for moving violations and some for permitting issues. That led to the assault on a traffic officer. There have been some political commentators who have tried to depict the behavior of Metro Police and SAPS as heavy-handed in this regard, but it must be pointed out that there were in fact two issues or two examples of violent behavior during that day. The first started with the assault of the traffic officer, in response to which more staff were deployed to the station deck, and the blockade of the deck, which then followed, in response to which the South African Police, Public Order Police, and the Metro Police's Tactical Response Unit was deployed. And the second incident of violence, which was 4 live rounds of ammunition discharged at the police, the origin of which appeared to be the persons who moved into the taxi with the tinted windows, who features in the video clip. A legal instruction was then issued to the occupants to exit the vehicle, and when that was not complied with over time, the lawful instruction was given to breach the vehicle to determine whether the firearms or firearm was inside that vehicle. When the window was breached, the sliding door opened and arrests were effected. But I must say, of course, this incident has unfortunately been mischaracterized by persons who did not understand the context of what happened on the street. I do want to say that we take great care with the professionalism of our staff, including the increasing deployment of body cams and dash cams to make sure that our staff are conducting themselves in a professional manner, because the ability to build meaningful relationships with other stakeholders depends on that professionalism. And for the same reason, we participated sincerely in the taxi task team, and spent time engaging the public transport associations in explaining the relevant legislation, the National Land Transportation Act, the bylaw. And so it is somewhat disappointing, MEC, to still hear people try and mischaracterize the impoundments as relating to the bylaw, when the taxi task team did deal at length and in quite some detail on occasion with those issues, and explaining why and how those impoundments are being done, and that we do not believe that it is appropriate to reduce enforcement to public transport operators, but instead that public transport operators should be professionalizing themselves, improving their service, improving the quality of driver training and compliance with the Road Traffic Act, and that this should in fact be a national commitment, that all enforcement agencies across this country should be applying the full extent of the National Land Transportation Act, because reducing that death toll is a responsibility of all enforcement agencies and national government as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alderman Smith. And then I will hand over to our Minister of Police Oversight and Community Safety, Minister Allen, if you could please share your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goedemiddag, good morning and good afternoon to everyone, also to those online. Colleagues, I'm wanting to state categorically, we have been here twice already under similar circumstances during the month of during the year of 2023. It was mid-March, and the eventuality of a national shutdown was a voice that was across our entire country. And the Western Cape government, together with its law enforcement partners, were at that time ready for any eventuality. And we have seen how we are able to ensure that our communities are safe. During the month of June, again, with the Khayelitsha taxi blockade, we prepared, we made sure that we engage all our partners to ensure that law-abiding citizens are ultimately safe, and that law-abiding citizens are able to carry on with their work and their duties in order for them to make sure that the economy is growing, so that our kids can get to school. So we will continue to engage all our safety partners. We would want to make it abundantly clear that we are doing everything in our power to ensure that we are ready for any eventuality, but also should any strike action take place, we will be prepared, and that the law will ultimately take its course. And for residents of the Western Cape, please know that we have showed in the past that when we work together, that when we have when we do a concerted effort towards making sure that no anarchy takes place, no unlawlessness takes place, we have shown in the past that we are capable, and we will continue in our efforts in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Allen. And so we have also received apologies from our representative from the South African Police Service, the District Commissioner General Beaton. Due to the situation of the announcement of the strike action, General Beaton has had to be called away to another meeting. And so we will go straight to questions now. And I would just like to reiterate what I said at the beginning before we started, that for any questions, please first state your name and your media house before you go ahead and ask your question, just so that we know who's who. And then questions can also be asked via Teams and either in the chat box or aloud, but please raise your hand and then we can get started. So I have a hand raised on Teams, Melikaya, and then I have a second hand here and a third hand. So Melikaya, you can go ahead and ask your question. Just unmute yourself.
Good afternoon to the officials and to your colleagues. To the MEC for transport. MEC, you have been convening meetings with Santaco. I believe Santaco says, I think about 4 meetings that we have seated. What do you understand to be the reason for Santaco to pull out from the task team?
Thank you, Melikaya. I think we'll take those 2 other questions and then respond to those. So please go ahead.
Sandy Sopaliso from Ground Up. Good afternoon, everybody. Basically, we just received the news now that in Kalicha, the shutdown in my city bus has been postponed. Are you guys aware what's going to happen going forward? Going to suspend the service or what?
Thank you very much. Question for MMC Quintus. And then the third question in this round.
It's Open Fish from the Cape Times newspaper. MEC Ellen spoke about readiness for any eventuality. I want to ask, now that we see that there's these vast attacks already happening in Khayelitsha, is the city ready, is the province ready to deal with this? And we know that the strike has already happened and there's already action on the ground already. So are you guys ready? And we've seen in the past what has happened in these kind of situations. And I want to ask also in terms of maybe law enforcement, will buses now be escorted? What is the plan moving forward? And okay, the task team question has already been answered. I wanted to also ask about when is the city and the province engaging with Santaco, because we know today they had their own meeting and you guys are here having your own meeting. And we know, I think it's ANC and EFF and PAC were also in Khayelitsha in the Santaco meeting. So I'm not sure if there was also a DA representative maybe that side. So I just also wanted to ask that. And lastly,
can we say that for next round of questions? Oh, yes. Is that okay? Okay. All right. Thank you. So yeah, we'll get started with you, Minister, and then the question for MMC Quintus, and then I think Alderman Smith, and then back to you, Minister McKenzie.
Thanks, Melikaya. The reason for withdrawing for the task team, the first one was impoundments, and the second one was the matters resolving is going too slow. The impoundments matters, Alderman Smith have responded to. I must say we were shocked when they withdrew from the task team because we had a meeting scheduled for Monday. And one of the items on the agenda, I think, was impoundments. So I was a bit shocked when we received that letter, but the meeting went ahead nonetheless. And yeah, we were disappointed that they withdrew from the task team. And just to answer the last question to Rebecca at the same time, no, we were not invited to that meeting. We also saw that those political parties attended, so there was definitely no DA representative or Western Cape government representative. We have been speaking to Santaco via a mediator the last few days, and we will still continue to do so because we want them back at the table. We don't want to strike. People need to get to work. So we have been speaking to them, including this morning, via a mediator, and we will continue with that conversation because we want people to get to work.
Thank you. Sandiso, thank you for your question. So the city will continue, where possible and for as long as possible, to maintain operations of the My City bus service. We have already requested support from the Safety and Security Directorate for our vehicles to be escorted in areas that we have historically experienced intimidation, harassment, violence, and arson, which is unfortunately, very much unfortunately, part and parcel of what happens when the taxi industry is supposed to be at a peaceful striking period. We see a terrific amount of damages to our vehicles as well as those of the Golden Arrow bus services, etc. So we have a constant overview of how operations are running. We will certainly endeavour our utmost to ensure that commuters are not left stranded. And where our buses run, we will continue to run our service until it is impossible to do so.
Sandiso, hi. The city has in the past had to activate deployment plans around strike action. Those generally involve escorting other public transport operators in and out of areas which are high risk or where attacks take place, and deploying staging areas where people can access public transport safely. At the Borchers Quarry off-ramp, for instance. And we will reinstate that. We will try and make sure that the public transport vehicles can run to the various public transport interchanges. The goal is to allow people optimal choices in terms of their public transport offering and the least impact on their convenience and safety. But this has been made very difficult or impossible for us in the past, for instance, at the Nyanga interchange, where some of the Avanza and minibus operators engaged in petrol bombing and stoning attacks and even shooting incidents. So we'll try as best as possible to avoid it. I must say, it does somehow make a lie, or to an extent make a lie of the professed intention of the strike. When you say the intention of a strike is to get government to change its mind about a particular policy, then engaging in violence severely undermines the credibility of your message. It starts exposing a subtext or a different motive for what you might actually be intending to do or be busy with. The fact that these strikes are routinely used to impact or destroy the infrastructure of opposing public transport options, I think belies some of the agenda at play. And again, you can't generalize. It might not be all public transport. It might not be the legitimate or associations and representatives of those associations. Some of those individuals I have met, and I don't believe them to be capable of these kind of judgment calls to vandalize or destroy property. But I suspect that that the respect for law and order does not cascade through the entire structure to all of the owners and drivers. And we routinely see this kind of violence, and it will, the violence, not the strike, will impact on people's public transport access. It's not the strike. The strike does impact, but other operators do step in. It is the persistent violence that makes it difficult for those other operators to have a free and open opportunity to deliver a service where one service has decided to withhold their service. Those are not democratic practices. Those are not free market practices. That is extortion and thuggery, and we must all as a nation condemn that. It's deplorable practices. Then to for Kushle, I noted your article that appeared this morning, and I do think some of the comments are quite unfortunate. I think the extensive politicizing of the issue probably bears some relationship to upcoming elections and the kind of political opportunism we routinely see from some of these parties. Because remember, all of them are represented in national parliament, and you're not seeing these kind of same dedicated efforts to impact on the legislation, which is under their control. The National Land Transportation Act is national legislation. So if they have issues with the legislation, the correct place to take that up would be through their representatives on the relevant standing committees or portfolio committees or otherwise, and not having done so, I think exposes an insincerity about the matter, which is, unfortunately is now politically opportune to exploit. So these, I note some of the comments. I can only say that I'm really disappointed in Mr. Hermanus. He's an individual who presents himself otherwise rational and reasonable. He did not in any of these meetings in the taxi task team seek to make a meaningful argument for the cessation of enforcement. Not he or any of his colleagues made a meaningful argument, or even tried really to argue that the enforcement should stop. Because how do you do that? On what basis do you suggest that it is okay for these vehicles to carry on behaving in a reckless manner because the lives of those commuters don't matter? So it wasn't a meaningful attempt at making that argument. My argument is the contrary from the narrative that Mr. Hermanus is peddling in relation to pro-poor or anti-poor. I would suggest that the industry is disrespectful and callous with the lives of indigent and poor commuters who it does not appear they mind putting in the hands, in many cases, of drivers without 10, 50, 100, 190 outstanding warrants. Last week, we arrested a person with 95,000 rands outstanding warrants. How does an owner of a vehicle permit a person who is such a frequent offender in terms of road traffic safety continue to operate a public transport vehicle which controls the fate and destiny of every person who sets foot in that vehicle? So I think the industry is desperately keen to deflect the nature of this debate to all kinds of political subtexts and narratives, when the core issue is, do you or do you not respect the rights of poor commuters to have safe public transport to their destination? That is my job to enforce, and we have diligently tried to do that. Not everything you try and do that is right is necessarily popular.
If I can just jump in, you mentioned by name specifically to one particular question. I took you back to mid-March with the unrest, with the shutdown, which was a national one, and we have seen that there was no anarchy here in our province. I took you to June, and we have seen with the Khayelitsha blockade, there was no anarchy. I can even take you back to the July 2020 unrest across our country. And here in the Western Cape, we have seen no area reach a place where it is anarchy. And again, we are maintaining, we have consistently showed as a Western Cape government that we prepare with all our law enforcement partners for any eventuality. And we're very committed to that particular task because we would want all our residents to live in safe and in a dignified manner. And that is what we will continue to do.
Thank you, Minister Allen. All right, I know we're running out of time because there is provincial parliament starting at 2 o'clock sharp, and so we will need to wrap up, and I want to do another round of questions. Marvin Charles, I see your hand up, and then after Marvin, Melekaya, I see you've got your hand up again. Are there any other questions from here? All right, so those two, if you can please go ahead with your question, Marvin.
Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Hi, Marvin from News 24. I just wanted to find out, Santaco said that they will be embarking on this massive stay away starting from today. Does the administration have any contingency plans in place specifically to protect the thousands of commuters that rely on taxis? And then just for JP, Councillor Smith, would you say that you've declared a war on the taxi industry? Thank you.
Thank you, Melekaya.
Hi, good afternoon. MEC Regan Allen for Community Safety and Police Oversight. Melekaya Zakagana from Eyewitness News here. We have seen this incident happening before, that buses were touched and some casualties, of passengers. Would you say you have been reacting to being more prepared for these Santaco stayaways? What will change this time?
Thank you. And then there's Tracy with a question online. Please go ahead, Tracy.
Hello, good afternoon. Tracy from the Daily Voice newspaper. Just a question to Alderman Smith with regards to the impoundments. So when I spoke to Mandla Hermanus yesterday, he mentioned that, the problem is also that most of the vehicles get impounded for very small things like a number plate that isn't fixed properly or a broken mirror. Can you give a comment with regards to that, please?
Thank you, Tracy. So if we can please go ahead with a response to that first question.
Marvin, I spoke to Mr. Mayor of Golden Arrow earlier on, and they have put in plans in place. In fact, his words were they don't want to leave any passenger behind. I've also spoke to Raymond Maseko of PRASA, and he echoed the similar words. They are in a planning meeting right now as we speak to ensure there's enough trains available to take all passengers home this evening.
Thank you, MEC. So yes, we also received confirmation from Golden Arrow Bus Services that they will put on additional fleet to their routes to pick up the extra demand that will be in place with the taxi shutdown. Marvin, the My City, as I committed to earlier, will continue running. Where our depots for certain routes operate, where we have standing fleet, we will bring them online as needed to ensure that there is adequate supply as well for commuters over this period, and we'll continue to run those operations until we are forced not to by violent elements within those striking. Thank you.
Malikaya, thank you so much for your particular question. As we would have noted across our entire country that there is some sporadic incidences, and here in the Western Cape, together with our oversight role over the South African Police Service, we have always been clear that in sporadic incidences, like it happens potentially in Mfuleni or in Khayelitsha, we would want to see arrest in that regard, because we would never want perpetrators or people that violently break the law get away with it. So when there's sporadic incidences that do happen, there's definitely a proactive approach to ensure that those perpetrators are held accountable, but our preparedness and our readiness to ensure that there's no anarchy that is in place like it has been in place with other instances. And I'm again referring to March of this year together with June this year, and we do plan with the South African Police Service and with all our law enforcement partners. But I want to say, when there's sporadic incidences, we are also calling on communities to make that information available so that these perpetrators can ultimately be held accountable. We would want no one to break the law. We want any person to respect the law, and for law-abiding citizens, we want to once again assure the residents of the Western Cape that from the Western Cape government side, including our partners, the City of Cape Town, we will do everything in our power to ensure that we do not land up in a place where we see total anarchy. But when there's sporadic incidences, it will be acted on. Thank you.
So Rebecca, Mayor, I've received some information that the My City services, as well as the Dial-A-Ride services, which, as everyone knows, are there to assist our most vulnerable members in our society, those services have been temporarily suspended in Khayelitsha due to risks and assessments. However, we are coordinating with safety and security, and we are endeavouring to have the services for Khayelitsha back up and running for the peak period under law enforcement escort. Thank you.
Thank you, MMC Quintus. We do need to wrap up, so if we can just go to the last question, please, from Tracy, Daily Voice. Alderman Smith, can you please give your comment there, and then we will wrap it up. Thank you.
So I do have to answer Marvin's question, though, because it's Marvin. I want to characterize the question in a whole manner of ways, but I'm going to refrain and just say that you must distinguish between political narrative and the fact. The city doesn't declare war on anybody ever. Warlords who deploy illegal firearms and petrol bombs declare war. Our job is to make sure that we enforce all laws without fear or favor, which we do. People who threaten violence when the law is enforced are in the wrong here. It is never the wrong thing to do the right thing. It can never be wrong to enforce the laws of our country and enforce them as effectively as possible. Nor can it ever be justified to deploy violence to arrive at a situation where the cessation of enforcement is induced. So I do reject the narrative that is being, that whoever made that quote to you is trying to construct. In terms of Melikaya's question, We will try and deploy our resources to protect as many of the hotspots as always, but this can be challenging because last time we saw some vehicles driving around the city with petrol bombs and illegal firearms, trying to find vulnerable vehicles to prey on. So when we asserted operations in one area, the attacks moved to undefended areas. When we had significant resources in Yanga and Khayelitsha, which were hotspots at the time, the attacks tried to move to Delft, and those same vehicles which we saw earlier the day in Khayelitsha driving up and down, then moved and tried to perpetrate attacks on vehicles in Delft, where they were then arrested by through the assistance of SAP's flying squad, for which we are very grateful. So I think that when you attack a bus with commuters in it, you make a complete lie of your professed concern about the safety and well-being of those commuters, about the rights of those commuters. It is no way you attack or throw a petrol bomb or attack a driver with a stone throwing attack where the subsequent evasive action by that driver could cause harm to those commuters. So I think that I hope you're going to be presenting questions to the chairpersons of these associations around how their conduct and what effective impact they're having on their associations and whether there are ineffective control of these associations. Because if a stone throwing attack happens like that, and you claim to be the leadership of an organization, but you're not able to control the actions of the organization, then are you in fact the leader of it? To Tracy, the impoundments are for substantive matters. As I said years ago, the only reason the city impounded many years ago was for the permitting issues, and that's mainly to avoid road taxis operating in areas where other taxi operators then take the law into their own hand and start taxi wars. When a taxi war starts, we are asked, what are you doing to avoid the taxi war? When a war is started, it's mostly too late. What government can do to avoid a taxi war is to diligently enforce without fear or favor the operating permits to make sure that only those who are legally on a route operate on a route to prevent that kind of violence from starting in the first place. We get thousands of complaints about the conduct of public transport operators, including from journalists who ask us what we're doing about these complaints that they have in their possession and how we have responded to X or Y complaint. And we deal with these complaints through the most effective and impactful legislation available to us, again, national legislation. And then I just wanted one last comment in relation to to Tracy, just say, Tracy, about 2/3 to 3/4 of our impoundments now relate to moving violations. So this is stuff where you are, for instance, driving in the oncoming traffic lane past vehicles stopped at a red light and then driving around those vehicles and turning past them into an intersection because you do not believe that it is your obligation to obey the same traffic signals as other road users. And it is important for us to impact on that kind of behavior. I did hear it say that the impoundment actions are closing transport businesses. I do not accept that argument because ignorance of the law cannot be used as an excuse in this regard. When you get your operating permit, you sign documentation when you accept that permit to indicate that you're a fit and proper operator and that you understand the full range of the legislation applicable. Nobody complains that when SARS enforces tax law, that certain people's businesses are adversely affected by the fact that they owe SARS money. In the same way, you cannot complain that the application of road safety laws impacts negatively on your business when your operators are conducting themselves in an irresponsible or lawless way. That public transport vehicle is a business on wheels. And as the owner of that business, you have the same care and obligations as the owner of any other business anywhere else for how the staff who run the business conduct themselves. If you run a takeaways and somebody is made sick from the food at your takeaways, the takeaway owner is going to get sued. In the same way, the owners of these public transport vehicles must take responsibility for what the drivers are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Smith. All right, so yeah, as I said, 2 o'clock, there is a sitting of the Provincial Parliament, and so our time is limited. Thank you, everybody, for the participation. And we will be doing a couple of one-on-one interviews now afterwards, and we'll obviously keep communication and statements flowing as the situation progresses. Thank you.